Welcome this evening to this event. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy lives for joining us. We very much appreciate it. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Jade Hagan. I am the Chief of Staff at the International Center for Sustainability. A quick note on us and our mission. We are a London-based think tank. We are just down the road, smack in the center of the City of London. We exist to foster a deeper relationship between India and the West, namely Delhi, Washington, Westminster. And we do this to enable a closer working relationship on all matters related to sustainability. We produce research, we provide learning and development, and through our research, we aim to impact policy on sustainability matters. The reason this book is important to us at the center is this book is on Hedgewar, the founder of the RSS. And without a proper understanding of the RSS, it is truly impossible to truly understand modern day India. A small household matter, if everyone could please ensure that your phones are turned off or on silent. However, I have no data, we're in the basement, so possibly everyone has the same issue, that will be fine. Allow me to introduce the speakers of the evening. Firstly, Sachin Nandha. Many of you might know him already. Sachin is the author of the book, Hedgewar, a Definitive Biography. Sachin has had a very successful career in private equity before dedicating his life's mission to creating a more sustainable planet. No small feat, right? Sachin is also the founder of the International Center for Sustainability. We are also joined by David Wood. David is a successful tech entrepreneur. He co-founded Symbian, a company which pioneered the smartphone industry. David is also the host of a, I personally find, wildly entertaining podcast titled London Futurists. You can find it on Spotify, where he and his co-host interview very prominent speakers on matters relating to AI, technology, regulation. So I'd highly suggest you listen to an episode if you haven't so far. David is also a fellow at the International Center for Sustainability. And thank you for joining us tonight, David.
Thank you.
A little bit on the agenda for this evening. We'll be starting off with a lecture by Sachin on the book. That will be followed by an in-conversation session between David and Sachin, where they will be discussing the book. You know, it's a biography. Hedgewar is quite an unknown person, but a huge reformist in India, someone who has had huge influence and impact on the nation. This book really details how his ideas have shaped 1/5 of humanity on the planet. Sachin and David will be discussing how his ideas can, how understanding his ideas can hopefully help us understand, many of the issues that we're facing today in modern day Britain and modern day Europe, and hopefully illuminate a pathway through those. And the evening will be concluded with an audience Q&A by yourselves. So please hold on to those questions if you have any good ones for our speakers this evening. So we'll be hearing from Sachin now. Firstly, a little bit about the book. As many of you, self-titular, Hedgewar, I'm the founder of the RSS. This book was published by Penguin. Sachin has never written a book before, so I think that's quite an achievement to have your first book immediately published by Penguin, and I think that also really underscores the importance of this book and why it was picked up by them. It took him 7 whole years to research and write. It is on pre-independent India, on the RSS, on the founder of the RSS, and a little bit about the RSS. The RSS is the largest volunteer organization in India. They have over 70,000 centers across the nation, 70,000 centers, and they run over 24,000 schools. So just think about that for a moment, the influence that they have, and also on shaping new minds entering the country, the economy, the social framework of the country. Sachin was granted unprecedented access, especially as a foreigner, to the archives of the RSS in India for his research for the book. And, our current PM in India, Prime Minister Modi, is a member of the RSS. He was trained by the RSS. The RSS is known as quite a controversial organization. It was banned twice in its history of existence. And former PM Nehru was actually quoted stating that it was one of the most dangerous organizations in India. So, on that note, please tell us more, Sachin.
Pleasure. So thank you so much, everybody. Good evening. And thank you, Jade, for that kind introduction. So I can see friends, I can see my elders, and of course, brothers and sisters. Thank you all for coming. Let me say, just from the outset, following on from what Jade just mentioned, I don't want this evening to be a typical conventional author's kind of talk on a biography and I won't be taking you through chapter by chapter what I've written and what happened in his life and all of that. You can read all of that, and if you can't read it, the audiobook will be out in August. So you can listen to it. But what I do want to do is I want to explore with David, but also with all of you, the Hedgewarian mind, his ideas, the ideas that, as Jade rightly said, has shaped not just 1/5 of humanity, but I think increasingly the 30 million strong diaspora of which many of you are a part, but also increasingly, I think, over the next 50, 60, 70 years, the wider United States, wider Europe, the Middle East, Africa. I think all of these places are going to be touched by the Hedgewarian mind. And I think we're just at the beginning of that journey. So hence, I think this book kind of comes out at a time, and that's what I want to explore with you. I want to explore ideas within the book about identity, nationalism, rootedness, what we call social trust, and then not just how they necessarily resonate with India's past, but how they're equally relevant for Britain's present. And so the other thing that I try and do in the book, and I want to do today, is I've never been interested in sanctifying or scandalizing Hedgewar, right? You know, he's a person that, as again Jade rightly said, very few people in Britain know of, have even heard of the name. Most people can't even pronounce his name. I did a focus group, and everybody said Hedgewar, and that would be the right way of saying it if you think about it, right? So, in fact, I tried to convince Penguin to spell his name differently so we could say it properly. But they disagreed with me, obviously, as a first-time author. Who's going to listen to me, right? So anyway, so Hedgewar has obviously been a relatively unknown figure in Britain, but actually, to my surprise, and maybe not, he's actually quite unknown in India too. Very few people actually either have heard of him or even know anything remotely sensible about him, which in itself is a mystery, considering what Jade just told us about the RSS. You know, I would say, arguably, his ideas have shaped the social and political architecture of modern India than any of his more famous contemporaries, including Gandhi, which is really controversial right off the bat. I think the Hedgewarian idea, the Hedgewarian mind, is much more pronounced now than Gandhi's vision or Gandhi's ideas. I also think the same for Nehru, his socialism. I also think the same of Bose. I think the same of Savarkar and also Ambedkar. I think the Hedgewarian philosophy, ideas, mindset is far more pronounced than any of his contemporaries. And so, the Rashitriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS, everybody knows about the RSS in India. But when you scratch that surface, when you ask people about the RSS, or what do you know about it, what do you think about it, how do you think it operates, how do you think it works, I discovered that very few people knew anything about the founder of the RSS, nor what animated the early RSS, what was really behind it. And the other side, of course, I want to kind of pick up on is that I think the whole thing while researching this book was a mystery. I mean, there were so many gaps throughout the story, the narrative of Keshav Hedgewar. Not all of those gaps have been filled by this biography, by the way. So even though it's definitive, that's Penguin's words, not mine. Let me tell you from the off, there are still many, many gaps and unknowns in there. And the archives that I had the privilege of accessing, we managed to translate and really grapple with maybe 30-40% of what's in the archives. That means there's somebody in this room, hopefully, who's much smarter than I am and much more patient and capable and can use AI now, which I couldn't use, to maybe translate and decipher the other 70%. And who knows what else we will discover about the early RSS and Hedgewar. So that's something to keep in mind. To me, the whole thing, as I kind of quip, the whole thing felt like a mystery to me, wrapped in a khaki-colored enigma. It was a challenging thing to unpick. And the reason why is because on the one side, you had the hagiographers, right? The hagiographers who deify Keshav Hedgewar, right? On the other side, you had the ideological snipers sitting on their ivory towers taking shots. Both are incredibly unhelpful, I found. And so I hope this gives a much more nuanced, pronounced narrative. I always say, I think what I've done by writing this book is something very unfashionable. A lot of people said to me, why on earth would you spend 7 years researching this character? And why on earth, would you go and spend so much time and energy talking about some of these very, very controversial, touchy, difficult subjects? But I got curious. I have a curious mind, and I went looking not for myth, but I wanted to find memory, right? And I wanted to get as close as possible to the truth, right? Close as possible to the truth. And so that was my ambition, and I hope this book somewhat represents that ambition. But of course, that's for all of you to judge as and when you read it or listen to it. But I don't think this is a book just about India, by the way. I actually think this is a book about the modern condition. I recently came across a line, and many of you will know this line. Our British Prime Minister recently said, Britain has become an island of strangers. He recently said this, maybe a few weeks ago. And the phrase stayed with me. I'll tell you why. Because I think Hedgewar's India, 1925, a century ago, was far worse. India, I would argue, was a continent of strangers. And this continent was divided by caste. It was divided by sect and belief. Okay? But much more dangerous was that there was a complete and utter collapse of mutual trust in the Indian society of his time. So, and I would like to remind everybody here, but also the book does it at great length, that Indians only 150 years ago, thereabouts, in large parts of India, couldn't drink water from the same well. It was an apartheid, not by law, it was an apartheid by custom, tradition, culture. There was no social contract. I don't believe there was much of a civic ritual, and there were no real unifying stories amongst the Indians that would unify them. And so Hedgewar, much earlier than 1925, in the early part of the 20th century, asked the question that actually George Orwell asked much later, which is what holds a society together when belief in knowledge, in the knowledge class, its institutions and its rituals have fallen apart. What binds a society together? And I think Hedgewar's answer, to my surprise, and certainly I think a lot of people who think they know Hedgewar will be surprised, that his answer wasn't ideological. it was a method. It was much more pragmatic. I found that Keshav Hedgewar wasn't a slogan shouter. He disliked martyrdom, and he had little time for performative nationalism. He had a really pragmatic saying, and it was, and I'm translating it, but it was, freedom is meaningless if you are too fragmented to use it. Freedom is meaningless if you are too fragmented to use it. And I think he believed that self-rule required, first, social repair. That a broken society cannot govern itself, not because it lacks resources, but because it lacks cohesion. So he decided to start not with law or politics, but with daily practice. He created something called the shaka, which means branch in Sanskrit. It's a humble beginning where it's a local gathering of men and boys, and they would stretch, they would do drill, they would play games, they would study history, and of course, all this while they would be being tough guys, right? The early RSS was tough, nothing like what it is today. He didn't really do any big speeches. He didn't have much money. He didn't really even have an audience for this idea in 1925. What he did do was that he created a ritual, a daily ritual for young men, boys, repetition. And what he did was he forced people to remember who they were. What were the unifying factors that binds you to your fellow man? Right? That's what he did. And if that sounds like indoctrination to you, well, that's precisely the discomfort that this book explores. And I asked the question, is shared memory dangerous? Or is amnesia more fatal? And I think this is where I found most Western academics, commentators, and many South Asian ones too, kind of lose the thread on this story. We often analyze India through GDP, FDI, demographic dividend, minority politics, so on and so forth, but we forget the invisible infrastructure of any functioning society, which is what Robert Putnam would have called social capital, right? The idea of social capital. And in one sentence, it's the willingness to trust a stranger. It's the willingness to trust a stranger, to volunteer, to sacrifice for the common good, not out of law, but out of culture and values. And all of this, Hedgewar saw, which others in his time had ignored or were not aware of. And I think what Hedgewar saw was not just that India was economically poor, but it was civically bankrupt. Civic society had broken down. And I show in the book at some great length why that was the case. So we need to ask ourselves, in this context, I want to ask ourselves tonight, where is Britain heading? Are we, if we are, and are we an island of strangers? And is that because of immigration? Is that because of inflation? I would argue not. What I would say, and I think what the Hedgewarian mind would say, is that we've forgotten how to act as a society, or we are forgetting how to act as a society. One could even say we are culturally overdrawn. We seem to be sharing less and less stories. We mock our own institutions. We know our rights, all of us know our rights, but very few of us and very seldom more and more people talk about our responsibilities. George Orwell in 1941 said this, England is perhaps, and I quote directly, England is perhaps the only great country whose intellectuals are ashamed of their own nationality. Now substitute the word nationality with community, and you have the 21st century up there. It's worth reflecting on. But this is the hard part, because I'm a big devourer of Christopher Hitchens. I love his prose, I read his books, I like his arguments. I don't agree with everything he writes or says, But that's exactly why I like him. And I can feel his ghostly spirit in this room clearing its throat, and sort of asking, well, Sachin, yes, that's all very good, my friend, and indeed, cultural revival, shared memory, civic unity, all good and well. Um, but how do you stop that from turning into bigotry, into a majoritarian rule, into mobs who think their identity justifies domination of others? Tough question to answer. There's no doubt about that. It's a very, very tough question to answer. And of course, I would say you don't stop it by denying it. I think you stop it by designing for it. So again, the Hedgewarian mind was very aware of bigotry, fanaticism, majoritarianism. He certainly believed in restoring Hindu self-respect, but not to assert supremacy. And we see that while he was alive, we see that over and over again. In fact, he was criticized heavily for it by people like Savarkar for not pushing the boat further. But he wanted to end civility, the servile mind. And we should also remember the Hedgewarian mind is a fusion of Indian thought and Indian influence, but also equally of Western philosophy, Western culture, and Western influence. I think that latter bit is often ignored by all sides, and I think that's a shame. I think he was a man that was desperate to find the truth about how to build a cohesive society that was sustainable in a democratic world. But of course, the line is thin. It's terrifyingly thin between this idea of recovery and revanchianism. Right? And I argue that I think there are two things that the Hedgewarian philosophy pushes forward that stops it from creeping into fanaticism. And that is, number one, that his was a civic frame, not an ethnic frame. And that's a mistake a lot of commentators make on all sides, by the way. If you read his speeches, if you actually look at some of the things he said to his own, you will notice that it's a civic framework, not an ethnic framework. The early RSS shakas were open to people of all castes, all religions, all classes, especially also to non-Hindus. We know that because we have the registers of all the people that attended those early shakas. And you will find people of all castes, all religions, all classes there. So it was a casteless, classless, creedless space that young men came into for 1 hour or 2 hours every day. The second is this ethos of restraint. You constantly keep seeing Hedgewar's notes about restraint. He never called for vengeance, but dignity, right? And the right, and he was absolutely passionate, and he felt that Indians must have the right to protect the integrity of India, because he could see the ruptures that were happening in society of his time. So what is a lesson for our own age, 100 years hence? So my questions and my sort of, I suppose, leading questions for us tonight, is if we wish to renew cultural identity, I think we have to pair it with philosophical humility. If we wish to revive national pride, then you have to anchor that pride in moral discipline, not tribalism. And the antidote to bigotry is not blank cosmopolitanism, it is civic, or as Hedgewar would argue, cultural nationalism. You have to be bound by rights, but also, even more so, by responsibilities. Right? A sense of civic duty. And I think that's the Hedgewar that many have forgotten or simply chosen to ignore. And I think it has been a sad failure of both imagination and research. And so what does all of this mean for us here in London? And I argue this, that if we live in a society where people know their pronouns, but not their neighbors, we have a problem. Right? We seem to trade our identity like fashion, but we resist any shared obligation. We are told that multiculturalism is dead. We are told that assimilation is oppressive, and we're told that history is a trauma. And so we either seem to retreat into nostalgia, or we surrender to nihilism. And I think here the Hedgewarian mind forces us to look at something different, a third perspective. And I think he would argue not for revolution, not for retreat, but actually for reconstruction. You have to reconstruct civic sense, civic duties, civic society, fraternity, we could say. And he would argue that we have to start local. You have to build ritual. You have to recover shared memories, and you have to practice discipline. And I think here's the interesting bit, and I think people often see the Hedgewarian mind or the Hedgewarian thought as very conservative or very traditional. To some degree, that's right, but that's not the full picture. His argument, and he actually said this in Marathi, and I've kind of translated it into English. It's this. He says, society without rhythm becomes noise. Society without rhythm becomes noise. Right? So his argument would be that we have to begin again. Right? Not at the level of parliaments, but at the level of the playground. Now, what Britain needs are better playgrounds. It needs better football fields, right? We need better gymnasiums where we can mix and talk and share and connect. And so my challenge to us tonight, and I will end with this, is that if India was a continent of strangers in 1925, and Britain is becoming an island of them in 2025, then Hedgewarian thought is not just something for India, but it also becomes our mirror. You don't have to like him. There's certainly things that he says and he's done that I don't like, that I don't think is necessarily the best way. But I argue, you have to contend with him. You cannot ignore him. Because he understood something that I think our modern elites, whether it be in Delhi or London or Washington, seem to have forgotten. And it's this. And again, I will paraphrase. Societies don't collapse because of bad politics. Trump will not make society collapse, believe it or not. They collapse when people inside them stop recognizing one another. So, if Hedgewar is not your answer, and Hedgewarian thought is not your answer, that's fine. But I will leave you with this then as a question. What is your method? And who or what do we still believe can hold us together? Thank you.
Wow, so much to think about. So I'm hearing that there's three reasons why it's worth digging into this book. One, it is a fascinating story in its own right, a story that people have not been aware of. These characters and the interactions, the terrible trauma that Hedgewar experienced, his parents being killed with bubonic plague, and all the terrible things that happened. So it's a fascinating tale in its own right. But secondly, for those of us who want to understand the future of the world, and I count myself here, I'm a futurist, I think we get better foresight by having better hindsight. We have to make sense of India in the present world, and India should not be thought of as a country or even a subcontinent, but as a potential civilization. And what I'm hearing in here is that Hedgewar's vision was that the main purpose of his activities was to rebuild the civilization. And we have to understand that in order to predict what might happen next in India. But even more than that, you're raising it to the level of what we do in Britain. I say more, I mean more locally than that, which is we have some similar issues here. So should we be going to playing fields? I'm reminded of, I think it was Wellington who said the Battle of Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton. So the strength of the RSS was the people played games, they learned wrestling and so on. So there are these three themes in your book. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's really well summed up, actually. You've actually read it. Or you've actually studied it. It's great.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
just listening to you now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that is absolutely fair. And I think the Hedgewarian mind, the thought process, and that's what I want people to understand. That certainly, yes, there's a great story, by the way, and he's such an interesting character. He's so hard to pigeonhole, right? And I think if you were, please come.
The seats on this side as well, by the way. So if some of you are getting...
But we generally punish people who come late by sitting in the front. So, so I would certainly say that his ideas have largely been ignored, even in India. And then the RSS have kind of owned his narrative so that it's theirs, right? The only way you could understand Hedgewar was by understanding the hagiographies that were coming out of the RSS. So what I try to do in this book is I try to make him human. I try to make him alive. I try and show you how, not what he did. What he did is there, but why did he do it? And what were the influences that shaped his early life, his teens, early 20s, these formative years, the trauma he went through, but also the luck he had. He was quite a lucky human being as well.
He was adopted by a very influential man who recognized his special talents.
Yes, that's right.
And then he could have ended up in prison for 10 years or so.
And he got away with that, yeah.
But he ended up just staying short. So he took advantage of his luck. He was ready to take advantage of his luck.
And I think he was really aware of it as well. And of course, what I think is that I think his ideas, as I mentioned earlier, is that I think his ideas are becoming more pronounced as the decades go by. And I suspect that a lot of young people in this room, as we go grayer, I think the Hedgewarian story is just about to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's going to touch more and more people, and not just Indians. It's going to go beyond the Indian story, into the diaspora, into actually other countries. Because, to your point about because I think we're facing some similar challenges.
Just flesh out a little bit more of the personality of Hedgewar. Because what I heard is a lot about men and boys, men and boys. And I was wondering, are there no women and girls in this story?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I write in the book, it's Indian society. If you look at the archives, anything post 1960, even 1950, and it's almost as if like women didn't exist in India. It was just men. Men wrote the stories. Men wrote the history. Even if you look at the family trees, it's all men. Where are the women? And so women's stories were not really captured. It's very difficult to see the women that influenced his life. We know they were there. We know he had 3 sisters. We know one was younger, 2 were older. We know this. We know that Munjay's wife, kind of his adopted sort of mother, was also a massively loving, caring, nurturing figure for him in those formative years. We know this, but we have very little about any of the women that influenced or may have shaped any of his perspectives. What we do know, though, and I say this in the book quite openly, and we don't talk about it enough, is he was absolutely adamant and clear that if Indian civilization was to rise, then women have to be emancipated. Women have to be emancipated. He was absolutely clear about that. And of course, he was quite radical. And I don't think we appreciate that. Today, if you ask modern commentators, he's a symbol of orthodoxy, conservatism, so on and so forth. But actually, if you look at his life and contextualize his life, he's a huge radical. Really pushed the customs of his own society to their limits.
He was angry with child brides.
He was angry with child brides, for example. And the story I tell you in here, which I found, was so there is a 14-year-old girl that is about to be married off to a 60-year-old man. Very common in India in those days. And he doesn't like any of this. He doesn't like these customs. He thinks that they're abhorrent. And remember, he's a tough guy. The British describe him in their archives as 6'2". right? And he's built quite broadly. If you can see his picture, he's quite a broad guy as well. Trained to be a wrestler. Yeah, trained to be a wrestler. And he's an imposing figure, and so he gate crashes this wedding. He gets on stage and he lambasts the old man and the whole audience for even allowing this wedding to go ahead. And then, of course, he helped the girl and her mother elope the village that morning, so they never turned up to the wedding. So he's a radical. I mean, there's no doubt about that. He's a radical. But the early RSS in 1925 was for men. It was for boys, and I think there are two reasons for that. One, he saw that the Hindu male was the problem, was a big problem. The Hindu male, the character of the average Hindu male, the social capital amongst men was problematic. And number two was society. I mean, you got to understand what kind of society we live in. I can't describe it at length here. There is no way, even if you wanted to, bring women into the RSS at that early stage. Society just would not have allowed it. He would have been a pariah to the extent that the organization probably would have died before it even began. And so he waits for 10 years, 11 years, before a woman comes along, a lady called Lakshmi Kelkar, another very elite, wealthy woman, widowed very young, inherits a huge fortune. And she decides and says, well, I've seen the influence these shakas have had on my boys. Why aren't you doing something for women? And he basically says, well, I've been waiting for you. And so then they start a women's wing, which still carries on today. It's not as prominent, I suppose, as the men's side. But the Hedgewarian mind is not some male chauvinistic philosophy. It's incredibly nuanced. And you have to know his stories and what he did to appreciate and understand that. And I think Hedgewar is not trying to start a uprising and a revolution. He's trying to cause a steady evolution within the Indian society. And so he's very conscious of balancing all the naysayers with all the people that support him and trying to take everybody with him on this journey, right? And at the time, he was, again, so on one side, people were calling him not radical enough. On the other side, they were calling him too radical. And of course...
you have a chapter called Not Fascist Enough, which is what some of them accused him of. You should be tougher to fight against the British, tougher to fight against the radical Islamist clerics.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in 1938, 1939, one of them, between there, Savarkar, part of the leader of the Hindu Mahasabha, writes in newspapers and says, what is this RSS? We know that it's a patriotic organization. We know it's trying to do good. But this man, Hedgewar, he's just ruining everything. And he writes like this. It's there, it's in the archives. And Hedgewar refrains from responding to any of this. And actually, the year after, in 1940, invites Savarkar to the training camps of the early RSS. And so you can see that there was this constant balancing act that he was doing between all the different permutations of Indian society. And even today, one of the secret sources behind the success of the RSS is that it does give space for all types of temperaments. So one thing that most people don't understand is, did you know that the early founders of the Communist Party of India were RSS Swayamsevaks? Right? So today, when we think about the RSS as this right-wing, Hindu, fascist, whatever, they're stories. But when you look at the facts and you start getting a magnifying glass out and you start studying these things, you start realizing, wow, the RSS really was this broad, for lack of a better word, church of ideas. And you had communists to orthodox Brahmins, you had Dalits, you had people of all classes and wealth doing.
Where was the role for Islamists in here?
Yeah. So
because one of the allegations is that RSS has been maybe not as anti-Islamist as some of the other groups, but there's no role in that vision of a society. They weren't pleased with what Gandhi was trying to do, which was to downplay tensions and to turn a blind eye to outrages.
Correct. Yeah. And again, in this book, I spend there's a whole chapter called Seeds of Division. chapter 6. Those of you who want to skip everything else and go straight to that.
Don't skip them.
It's a really difficult chapter to write. People who are with me on this journey will know. Reading all the live accounts of what happened in those days was not just traumatic. I mean, it was scarring. Really, it really was. But Hedgewar is clear that just as there is a social collapse within the Hindu society, which had been happening for a long time, there had also, after 1918, been a massive rupture within the global Islamic movement. Those of you who haven't read the book, or those of you historians will know what happened in 1918 was that World War I ended, and the Ottoman Empire was dissolved, and the Caliphate was no more.
It had been based in Istanbul.
Based in Istanbul. So they were on the losing side of the war. And of course, what most Indians never appreciated, and in fact in modern discourses never talked about, which I do in this book, is that the repercussions of what happened in Istanbul in 1918 affects India directly. What happens in broadly, if I may, David, what happens broadly is that the Islamic world has a crisis of faith. For the first time in 1400 years, there is no caliph on earth. And we forget that those of us who are students of Islam will know and will tell you that in Islam, it's not just about worship and theology and the religion, but it's also about creating a Islamic ummah on earth in the here and now. And so without a caliph, who is the arbitrator of Islam? Who do we point to for our true north? And so what happened was the Islamic world, I'm painting broad brushes, fragments into three buckets broadly. One bucket is those Muslims who basically said, the problem with the Ottoman Empire, the problem with the Middle East, the problem with the middle world is Islam, we should get rid of it. And they became the secularists, Ataturk, who formed Turkey. They all became secularists, they rejected Islam. The second bucket were people who said, no, Islam has given a lot of good to the world, there's a lot of value in the world, there's no doubt about it, but it needs to reform. And these were the reformists, these were the journalists, the writers, the poets, the academics, the sheikhs, and then there was a third bucket. And the third bucket really took root in the subcontinent. And the third bucket is this conservative form of Islam that basically says, I'm caricaturing, we have a scholar with us as well, but basically that God must be punishing us for this humiliation that we've just experienced, and that's because we've lost true Islam. We're not Muslim enough. And so they started to appeal to tradition and to custom and kind of looked back towards 7th century, 8th century AD for their direction. And suddenly you got the sprouting of Deobandi Islam, Beverly Islam. These are highly orthodox, conservative movements, and they take root in India. They don't take root in many of the other parts of the world, but they took root in India, Sri Lanka, what we call today Pakistan.
Kerala.
And of course Kerala. Those of you, again, 1921, what is a euphemism called the Kerala riots. It was a massacre. You should read those documents. I reference them at length. But basically what happened was that there were people within India who said that, well, we've lost the caliph over there, but those of us who are the rightly guided ones, we can start a Dar es Salaam right here. And so they wanted to not just oust the British, they wanted to also build a Dar es Salaam in Kerala. And that's what they tried to do. 30,000 men, mostly men, young men, were brainwashed into this. And the human loss of 1921, I think, scarred Hedgewar, by the way, because he was very aware of what was going on. Munjay went on the ground to actually report on this stuff. And he's writing to Hedgewar when he's in prison. And not only were 30,000 Mapila Muslim men killed by the British mercilessly, because remember, they challenged the state. They didn't just challenge Hindu India or anything like that. They challenged the state power. And so the state was brutal and crushed them. But tens of thousands of Hindus were not only murdered, but tens of thousands were forcefully converted. And of course, the India of those days was that once you've touched meat or beef or or you've slept with a Muslim man, that's it. You can never come back into the tradition. And so thousands of Hindus found themselves isolated and rejected by their own. And these ruptures were happening in India at that time. And so when we think about the RSS, you have to think about this context. You have to think about what was going on in this country, which for hundreds of years was fairly cohesive. We forget that. India, the Deobandi Islam, this considered form of Islam, actually starts off after the First War of Independence in 1857. But most Indian Muslims reject it. They're not interested. In fact, if you look at Indian Islamic traditions before 1918, they're incredibly what I would call progressive movements. The poetry, the theater, the music, it's beautiful. It's also very, very seductive and sexual. After 1918, it's all gone. It's all gone. And by the 1920s, you know, Muslims themselves are being silenced by this radical form of clerics. And there weren't thousands of them, by the way. We're talking about a few hundred clerics managed to capture hundreds and hundreds of mosques. And they captured the imagination of young, angry Muslim men who were despondent with their lot. There was not enough jobs. The British state had retreated after World War I because they were almost bankrupt. And there was not enough police on the streets. There was a sense of lawlessness. And in this lawlessness, in this vacuum of power, you get all of this.
Let's bring it a bit closer to home. Not quite so cataclysmic, but there has been issues in Leicester. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Chloe will help us here. But yes, absolutely, yeah. Those of you who know 1922, 20, you can tell where I live. I live 100 years from ago, you know. But if you look in 2022, many of you would have heard that there were issues in Leicester, yeah, between Hindu youths and Muslim youths.
So what triggered these?
Yeah, and so what they'll tell you is you read the reports and you hear everything from a cricket match to tensions building up over decades, to jobs or housing issues. So you'll hear lots of these things. And that's fine. And all of that is probably true in gradations. But when you get to the nub of it, I'll show you, and you'll see it. I won't even have to tell you. It's called social capital, right? And so this is Leicester, by the way. So Chloe, if you'll help me. So that's the demographics of Leicester City, ethnically, right? Ethnically. Leicester is split into 4 parts, broadly, in how these communities live. So the blue side is Christian and no non-religion, right? Mostly. Hindus live up there and down here in the orange bit, and Muslims, 23%, live in that quadrant. Leicester really is like that. And I tell you, I think Manchester's the same, Birmingham's the same, parts of London are the same, right? So our societies are incredibly fragmented, and I will show you more evidence of this. So if you then click, so this is the Muslim quadrant of Leicester, where the red mark is Green Lane Road. You will see that is where these clashes happen, in that one little box. The media would have you believe all of Leicester was burning. It was 12 streets. That's the 12 streets. And you know why it happened there? Because in that wider Muslim area, 23%, in that box was a new migratory wave of Hindus from Portugal. That happened over 10 years. So suddenly the Muslims felt, who the hell are you guys? Right? What's going on? Why are you here? And there were rubs culturally. There were rubs. Now, these guys practiced a form of Hinduism that is very loud, noisy, musical. You'd have all known it, right? They'll do outdoor parades and they'll dance in the parks and all that. All around there, you will see Deobandi mosques. Deobandi mosques, music is almost haram.
Haram means?
Haram means not kosher. What does not kosher mean? It means you just shouldn't do it, right? You just shouldn't do it. It's prohibited, right? It's prohibited. Muslim corrupts. It's the kind of Platonic idea, right? For those of you who are philosophy students. So here you had lots and lots of tensions building. And eventually all those tensions spilt over. What you had effectively, guys, I believe, is that you had a Muslim neighborhood. Within a Muslim neighborhood, you had a small pocket of Hindus, newly arrived, 10 years, very different customs and traditions, rubbing each other constantly, but they were strangers. They were neighbors who didn't know each other's names, and they were strangers to one another, living right there, right? So now this is the actual statistics. I just want to point this out. This is where the Hindus live, ward by ward, where the Muslims live, and this is where the Christian population lives. Do you not notice the pattern? And look at where the clashes happened. If you look really closely, those of you with the eagle eyes, you will see that in this deep green spot where there's a concentration of Muslims, there's a little orange dot. Can you see it? Yeah. That's that. This is what will happen to any society, anywhere in the world, across culture, across time, anywhere where if human beings live side by side, but do not have the nodes to get to know each other, eat together, play together, understand one another, share each other's stories. If any society anywhere in the world, and Hedgewar's India was full of this. It was full of this. But of course, in Hedgewar's India, it wasn't just religious divide. It was caste divide. It was linguistic divide, and so on and so forth. So Hedgewar builds a node called the Shaka, which is a node is a word that Robert Putnam uses, and essentially, where in this node you are casteless, creedless, classless, right? And so people were able to mix, play, spend time together, become friends, and then the rest dissolves. The tensions dissolve. But this is what's going on in Leicester.
So what is the hope? They unite behind support for Leicester City Football Club? But no, it's a bit facetious. But where is the thing that will bring people to have a bridging capital rather than this bonded capital that you speak about?
Yes, that's a good question. That is $1 million question. Because bonded capital, although good, so the state, by the way, in the UK has been marvelous, absolutely marvelous, at supporting new migrants. Remember, I'm one of those migrants. I'm the beneficiary of immigration in this country, right? And most of you here are as well. And the state has done a fabulous job of facilitating migrants to come into this country, settle down, and build what I call bonded social capital. What bonded social capital is that you find your own, ones that look like you, smell like you, talk like you, eat like you, right? And then you help each other. And the state helps you help each other. And that's fine. When you're new, you're in an alien country, alien environment, you need your own. It's human nature again. You just go to parts of Spain. You see entire villages that are just British. You might as well be in England, right? There's not an ounce of Spanishness in there, right? Now that's perfectly common. It's human nature. Okay. But where I think we've gone wrong is that we've stopped at bonded social capital. Bonded social capital has a downside. The downside is when you get too much of it, you start othering. You start othering. The other looks like an alien. The other looks scary. The other looks untrustworthy. And then you start losing social trust, social capital. And then you get ghettoization. And I fear that in our country and all across Europe, we've been practicing a particular form of multiculturalism, which has helped migrants and has helped thousands of people get on. On the whole, a lot of the Hindu community is well integrated and fabulously interconnected, intermarrying. Just study the marriage rates. You'll see what bridging capital does, right? And then you'll see what bonded capital does. When people are studying together, eating together, playing together, they will also date. They will also get married. They will also have children. And that builds a cohesive society. But when that stops or comes to a zero, you start getting tensions building up. And I fear that some of our communities have integrated incredibly well, and they are progressive, and some of our communities are not. And so too much of bonded capital and not enough of bridging capital creates these problems.
It is time now to hear the wisdom, the provocations, the agreements, the disagreements from the audience. And that was the first hand up there in the fourth row back. We might give you a microphone, although we can hear you. Thank you. This gentleman here with chairs.
No, you just say.
Yeah, I can speak. Yeah, Atul Shah, City University, in the Department of International Politics. Fascinating, very articulate, but it's a biography. And in politics, we don't do biography because what the assumption of hindsight is that there was one kind of controlling figure, one big guru, and that's actually quite often a Western way of doing sometimes analysis. You know, so when you did your research, was there an army like you talked about the Shaka, for example? Was there a second and third tier army of people who actually played a leading role in popularizing that kind of way of thinking and doing? And also the counter, the other, around the same time, you got Brahmo Samaj, for example, Ram Mohan Roy.
Yes.
There were other movements at that time.
Yeah.
So why give so much attention to one particular person in that time when, of course, the pressures of empire, the kind of, the exploitation of the people, etc., organically created a sense of Indian nationalism anyway.
Yeah. Gosh, there's some really good questions there. Where should I start? So why Hedgewar? Simply because there was a huge gap. Nobody seemed to know anything about him, and I just saw the opportunity and was honored and lucky enough to have the opportunity to do it. So I did it. So really, it was not very clever or foresighted on my part. It was just I had the opportunity, so I did it. That was that. But you talk about, and you're quite right. So that you asked another question about this kind of central figure who controls everything and kind of is the center point of the RSS. I write in the book, and I say in the podcast that I've been on, many of you may have heard it, I hope, is that I keep saying, I make this argument that the popular narrative is that the head of the RSS or Keshav Hedgewar would have sat on a Star Trek-like captain's chair in the throne, and he presses buttons, and millions of people around the country do what he tells them to do. I mean, that's nonsense. It really is. The RSS is just incredibly decentralized. It was decentralized in his time because I think he designed it that way. He designed it that way. There were no mass communications, right? Roads were non-existent. I mean, Indian roads today are difficult, never mind back then, right? So he knew that the organization or the movement that he was building was decentralized. And so what he did so marvelous, and I kind of just touched on it, is that he created a method. He created a method which would outlive him, which would not rely on him to make every little decision, but actually empower the grassroots and empower a very ordinary Indian with the skills and the capability. In fact, he defines capability in two ways. He says capability is composed of skills and character. And so the Shaka is hell-bent on taking the individual as they are and then giving them the right skills and the right character to then go and run their own neighborhood. You go into your own neighborhood and do your own thing, whatever that is. So hence, what you see even today is, apart from the symbol of the RSS, which is this Bhagwat Dwaj, the saffron flag, and their pratna, the prayer, the pratna that they do at the end of the Shaka or the beginning of the Shaka as well sometimes, you'll see no commonality. You'll see no commonality because each person is adapting to their own neighborhood, to their own local pressures. And so even though the popular imagination, which by the way I think the RSS have done on purpose, is that to make you believe there is this one coherent army out there, the reality is that it's incredibly decentralized, mobile, agile, at the grassroots orientated. It's not a top-down culture. It's a very much a grassroots up culture. And I think he consciously designed that because he was absolutely abhorrent with this Indian mentality of deifying people. He saw that Indians had this habit, terrible habit, of deifying people. Those of you who are not Indian, you may not know that, but it's absolutely true even today. You give any Indian an opportunity, he'll deify them. And then the problem with deification...
Sunil Gavaskar.
Yeah? Sunil Gavaskar. Yeah, Sachin Tendulkar, right? Recently Rohit... Sorry, that's straight away. But we deify people. And the problem with deification, according to Hedgewar, is that you stop trying to become them and you start worshipping them. You make a statue of them and then you don't do anything else about it.
But to follow up the professor's question, supposing Hedgewar had not done what he did, supposing he had been sentenced to 10 years in prison instead of 1, or supposing when he came back from his medical studies in Calcutta, he'd become a doctor. Would something like the RSS have sprung up? Would India have ended up on the trajectory that it has today?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And it's a hypothetical. So let me just say, you're absolutely right, and I talk about it
It's
in
not
the
just a
book.
hypothetical, it's a question, do individuals matter? You know?
Yeah.
Should we strive to make a difference as
Yeah,
individuals?
yeah. So the short answer is I think yes. I think individuals do matter. But I think what I show in this book is that there were many versions of the RSS out there at that time. So there was a group called the Kashkars. Some of you may be familiar with this word. Maybe I'm pronouncing it differently. My pronunciation is awful. But Kashkars were Punjab, modern day Pakistan, creeping into Rajasthan and that area. The Kashkars had the same uniform as the RSS. They had the same sort of drills, the same sort of martial arts training, the same. But do you know what the Kashkars were about? They were Muslim men trying to unify India to create a Muslim India. Exactly the same. And in fact, there's a letter from Golwalker to Hedgewar in 1938, and he says, I'm in Lahore, and I'm seeing loads of people who look just like us. They do things just like us, but they're not us. And I think we're going to have problems. So the short answer is there were many groups. There were many groups that were all trying to do their own thing. They're all trying to, because they all had a vision of India. They all saw the British retreating. So the Indian elites were clear, I believe, by 1920s, that it was a matter of when the British left, not if the British left. But what they were all vying for was what kind of India would you create afterwards? And that's the big question.
Vikram.
I'm Vikram Shah. Another Shah.
The mic to your mouth.
First of all, thank you very much for talking about the book without talking about the book. And it was really enlightening, and I learned quite a lot. To answer his question, one is that quite a lot of people today also think about Veer Savarkar and RSS rather than Hedgewar. Not very. So one of the biggest legacy of him is that he is not seen anywhere.
Yes.
And RSS is there. So it was never a one person worship. Gandhi also said that I'm an ordinary man like you. So if you deify me, you are trying to go away from the duties that you are supposed to have. So anyway, the question is this. Indian society, though fragmented at that time or now, wherever it was, at the grassroots level, it must not have been fragmented enough. So both Hedgewar and Gandhi could bring all of them together for one particular thing, because at the base of that they had the value system, and they said one man who said like the king is naked, and everybody said yes. That's what Gandhi and Hedgewar could achieve, because so my question now is this: is that possible in the Western world or any other culture that is not India?
Wow, that's a heavy question. I would say yes, absolutely. In fact, the question is though is how will it happen, not if it will happen. You would have noticed that just oh, she's not here. Zoe's not here. Who was with me in the office with Zoe? But so one of my interns is studying India as a civilizational state, and what does that really mean? So she was studying a document that came out of the State Office, the State Department of the United States. And the United States State Department wrote a paper, just came out this week. And I kid you not, they say that the West has a common heritage. And they start from Aristotle and Plato. And they go all the way through to Thomas Aquinas, the Catholicism, Christianity, Protestantism. And they say that actually the West has a binding force. We have to remember it. We have to bind together for it. Now remember the thing that I said. So the US under this president and this regime, but also if you think about what Orban is doing, You think about what Marie Le Pen's about. You think about what the Alternative for Deutschland is about. All of these people are trying, in their own different ways, to ask that exact question. What will bind and unify Europe or parts of Europe? Now, how will it happen? Will it happen? I don't know. But can it happen? Yes. But there's a but. Europe has changed. Europe is not just white. I'm as British as it gets, but I'm not white. I'm not Christian. I will live and fight and die in this country, right? Very clear about that. I think this country has a lot to offer the world in terms of values and all the rest of it. But I'm not the things that the State Department wrote about. So there is a reckoning coming, and I don't really know how to answer your question, but I think that's the permutations of what's going on here.
There's a question in the third row back with that's you, yes, with glasses and beard. Sorry to typecast you. Hold the mic to your mouth.
Sachin, thank you very much for an amazing talk. I just wanted to ask, how close or far is the current RSS from its original Hedgewarian mind?
So if Hedgewar looked down from wherever he is, would he be happy with what has happened with the RSS in the succeeding 80 years? And would he be happy with India? Would he be displeased?
There's always one person in the audience who asks a question that is going to get you shot.
You get shot, are you?
And there he is, right there. That's a tough question to ask, right? Because the RSS has interwoven itself into the entire fabric of Indian society. Like, I do not think you can go into an urban center, tribal center, rural center, where within a few streets you're going to bump into something connected to do with the RSS, a charity, a school, whatever. It's absolute. So then the question becomes: is would Hedgewar be happy with the Indian society, right? So I'm going to answer it in that way, if that's okay with you. So I think Hedgewar would be slightly disappointed that caste still plays such a big role in modern India, and there's no denying that. There's just no. I think you're in self-delusion if you think caste is not a problem in India. It's a big problem in India. It's a divisive problem in India, and although it's got better, infinitely better, of course, from Hedgewarian days. I mean, the Hedgewar's world that you see is very different to the world now. But nevertheless, I think it's not, the needle hasn't shifted as much as it should have. One. Number two is he would be very pleased, though, with the emancipation of Indian women. I think he would be very pleased with the emancipation of Indian men from this regressive sort of, thou shalt not travel, thou shalt stick to my own, all of that. I think he'd be very happy with the Indian diaspora because of its progressiveness, innovative, socially mobile, confident. I think the other thing that I would make is I think Hedgewar would be incredibly nervous about the direction of India today. He'd be incredibly nervous because India is heading towards a reckoning, just like Europe is, I think, just like the United States is.
What kind of reckoning?
Reckoning in the sense of India still hasn't fully conclusively answered to itself what it truly is. And the RSS, as it's grown and as it's become an interwoven part of the Indian society, it's got to a point now where do you follow the Hedgewarian mind and model and go that way? Socialism is dead in India. Socialism is dead, and that's failed, and that's, But the other one is that other part that says that actually we're still skeptical of the RSS. We're skeptical of this Hedgewarian thought. They don't know what they are. Are they the cosmopolitan sort of Indian? Are they this nihilistic Indian? And there's a question mark there. And the other thing is, RSS itself, I think, has to revisit Hedgewarian ideas, the decentralized nature of the Hedgewarian ideas, the idea of the Shaka being an inclusive space, not an exclusive space, right? I think it's only a matter of time before men and women merge and do activities together. right? And all of that. So I think it's a nuanced tapestry. But then I'm not frightened of talking about that, right? I don't think anybody else should be either. I could be wrong, but that's how I see it.
We'll try and take a couple more questions. Richard here on the fourth row.
No, Richard.
Well,
there you go.
I see three people there in a group. Maybe we'll take three questions together. Richard, and then the lady here, and then the person back there. Yeah.
So thanks for a great talk. So humanity's Achilles heel is defining us by who we are not, by the other. The leaders you were talking about, Trump, pretty much everywhere where, should we say, nationalistic populism or populist nationalism is endemic. You have to take some pretty big steps to avoid the cohesion you like to see not turning into the defining yourself against the other. I had a jaw-dropping conversation with an Indian colleague of mine, sophisticated, urbane, and somehow the war or near war with Pakistan is really good. We can now eliminate them. He said this with a straight face. We can now, so however cohesive India is, it's defining itself in some people's mind as not being Pakistan, not being Islam. And the only example I can think of in the modern world where this was dealt with was Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, being able to construct a society. Maybe Lee Kuan Yew would do this in Leicester if he could. Deliberately wiring together a constitution that involves the different Indian, Malay, and Chinese, so that they can't escape each other and they're governing it together. So I don't know if that isn't a question.
Well, that's a fascinating thought. Hold that thought. Let's pack one row forwards to the person next to you.
Really great talk, Sachin. I thought it was important for one of the women to ask a question, considering we're talking about emancipation of women. It's kind of an extension to what was just asked just now, and I don't know the history as deeply as what some may know in the room, but I am interested in the future. And you talk about how the Hedgewarian mind has a solution for today's world and today's problems, and you also talk about how back in the day, the movement was much more about cohesiveness, inclusiveness. It was creedless, religionless to some extent. Some would argue that the HSS that we see now in society today in the UK is probably not very religionless. So how do you think there's a place for it in helping us solve some of the world's problems that are happening right now? We're seeing a resurgence of conflict that is religion-based at the moment all over the world. And when a religion is under attack, you have more, there's more probability of people becoming more insular rather than bridging. So that's kind of what your thoughts are.
Big questions there too, and let's take a comment from a few rows back. Yes, and then I'll summarize, and you can wind up, Sachin.
Thank you, Sachin, for all the great insights.
Yeah, please. One more back.
Next round.
Sorry.
Thank you so much for coming here to talk about your book. As far as I know, there is not a lot of existing literature on Dr. Hedgewar. So how did you go about your research, and what were some of the important sources you referred to? And what was the most interesting thing you found during your research, something that surprised you?
Gosh, that's a ball I can bat.
Do you want to have one more? Because we really are going to have to stop in a minute. So one last question, and you can have.
One final curiosity of mine was you also have worked in the private sector with banks. So what are the key major leadership lessons which you could step out of Mr. Hedgewar? Because building such a massive organization is not a small feat. So if any leadership lessons which you all could gather from it.
Right. So how can we define ourselves, have a sense of unity without also defining ourselves against the others and causing more problems? Is the example of Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore a good one, because he basically said from the beginning, we have to be in this together. You know, if we don't pull together, we're going to fail. More broadly, what is the role of religion as causing problems in today's world, or possibly being solutions to it? You know, Hedgewar emphasized creed doesn't matter, caste doesn't matter, class doesn't matter. Then more broadly about your research methods, what you found that was interesting, and yeah, if you've another half an hour, you can give leadership implications. So maybe you will leave some of that for another day.
Yes.
But, pick out one or two concluding thoughts, please, Sachin.
Yeah, thank you for that. Let me just quickly back the research one out the way very quickly, okay, because I can handle that one. So there are archival materials in that the RSS have held for decades, and literally it's a room, a dusty room with lots of boxes with termites eating that paperwork up slowly but surely, and the humidity of the place is also eating up some of the paperwork. So sadly, it will be lost soon in the next 30, 40 years, but right now there's lots of archival material there. I also use the British Library. British Library is fantastic for a researcher. They document everything. So I found out what his curriculum was in the school that he went to at the age of 14, because the British had a spy outside that school who kept a log of what all these kids were learning. So I'm very thankful to that spy. So British Library, and then over in Delhi, there were microfilms that I got access to, which were incredibly insightful. So it was there, and then I had a team of translators who were helping me translate from either Bengali, Marathi, or Hindi. But also he could write in Urdu, and also he was writing in code. So a lot of the things that he was communicating was in code.
So it sounded bland and ordinary, but there was important messages.
Yeah.
So there's work for future generations of researchers
absolutely,
to do there.
Absolutely. So that's how we did it. The question around religion as a force for good or ill. You'd have noticed people like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who started off as somebody who left Islam. Her life was under threat, became this kind of activist, atheist, all the rest of it, and then recently has adopted Christianity. And why? Because she says that actually human beings need some rootedness, and I mean using the Frommian sense, the Eric Fromm sense of rootedness. And she said that rootedness comes from some form of faith or religion, because it gives you structure, and it doesn't matter if you don't believe in God and all that, and believe in Christ in literal theological aspects, but it gives you a sense of community, sense of belonging, what I would call bonded social capital. It gives you a sense to connect with another human being that's like you in some ways. But that's not enough. So I think religion does play a role. It's natural for a human being to have religious ideas, especially about the supernatural and the things that we can't necessarily answer. I think life is beautifully mysterious, and religion helps us navigate and connect with some of those mysterious, beautiful aspects of being human. But that cannot be enough. We have to, as a humanity, I want to be frank, defang all of these religious attitudes that are prohibitive or have a supremacist attitude. That somehow my religion is the right religion, my scripture is the right scripture. That exclusivism, that I've got it right and my God has got it right, or my cleric has got it right and all of you are idiots, that has to be defanged, and we have to have the courage to confront that directly. So I think if we can find that balance, then I think it can be a force for good. But it needs to be plural. Ultimately, the idea of pluralism, I think, is very key to answer your question. And then the question about Singapore, two things to say on that. He was incredibly dictatorial, right? And he ruled Singapore like an iron fist to make sure all of you people are going. I'm not sure any Indian wants to see something like that happen across 1.4 billion people, nor I don't think it's possible. So the Singapore model, I think, is interesting. I think is really worthy of study. Not that I'm an expert. But is it scalable? I don't know. I have my doubts. I think the Indian solution, the Hedgewarian solution, if followed, so it goes back to your question about the RSS, if followed, is super interesting. Because in an age of AI, in an age of technology, where I am able to talk to somebody 5,000 miles away, but I don't know who my neighbor is, in a world like that, I think the currency of trust is going to become even more valuable. Just my ability to trust David, who could be my neighbor, who I've got nothing really in common with, but the fact that he's my neighbor. But if we can create nodes that culturally forces me and David to spend time together in a civic sense. And we may have totally different beliefs in philosophy, in ideas, and whatever, but we both agree, and this is the Hedgewarian thing that we haven't spoken about yet, and I'd like to end with this. The red line for Hedgewar was a notion called Deshbhakti. There is no English translation that I could find. Lazy people, most academics can be very lazy. I know there are some here, but you'll agree with me, sir, that academic, a lazy translation of Deshbhakti is patriotism. That's a very lazy translation. It's not that at all. Deshbhakti is Deshbhakti. What it means basically is Desh means soil, literally the soil. And Bhakti means a psychological state of mind where you form union with the soil. Now, let's think that one through for a minute. So therefore, you're not uniting to a state, a prime minister or a flag or a government. You're not uniting to a political ideology. You're uniting to the soil of that where you live. So if you take Deshbhakti into a British context, and me and David, as different as we may be, we can both agree that this soil nourishes us. This soil gives us life. This soil gives us what we love and what we need, and safety and protection. Now suddenly I can become deeply loyal to that soil. I can serve the soil in an environmental sense, in a civic sense, and both of us can bind our capacities together to make our neighborhood better. So I think you have to decentralize, you have to localize, and your red line has to be Deshbhakti. If those things happen, then I think a very disparate group can become unified enough, but yet plural enough to allow the other to be the other. And I think that's the holy grail, for lack of a better word and a bit of a pun, but that's the holy grail of how do I remain an individual in a pluralistic society while having something that binds us together to say, yes, I agree with this, and this is worth striving for, because we all depend on it. I think that's the Hedgewarian idea, message. Look, is it the complete solution? I don't know. But is it worthy of study and worthy of reflection for everybody? I think so.
And in terms of leadership lessons, what I would point to Jim Collins, his book From Good to Great. He emphasizes that the truly influential leaders are those who are ambitious, but not for themselves. They don't impose their own character, their own personality. And in fact, some of the most successful CEOs in the world today, arguably the CEO of Microsoft and the CEO of Google, they are both these level 5 type leaders. They are not pushing their own character to the forefront. It's not about them. They're enabling others to do well. So the focus not on heroes, but on let's build a disciplined organization with a common purpose. That's possibly an answer I would throw into the mix there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit it on the nail. There's a wonderful saying that Emerson once said, comes to my mind when you said that. Emerson once said, some people are so loud that I can't hear them. I think that's beautiful. I think Elon Musk is so loud you can't hear him. And the Hedgewarian form of leadership is leading from the back, right? It is to be forgotten. I think Sir over here said it, right? The gentleman over here said it, that he was forgotten consciously. So he built something to relinquish it. He built something to then let go of it, not to own it, not to hold on to it. And that's an incredible feat for a human being with egos, right? We all have egos. So the ability to then let go, I think, is profound. So his leadership would be build, drive, decentralize, empower, and then let go.
Well, we're going to let go at this point, even though we haven't answered all the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing. Oh.
Thank you, David. I'll just hold it. This is easier. Thank you both to David and to Sachin. I hope you all found the talk this evening illuminating, enlightening. I certainly learned a lot, and I've been around this book for a few months already, and I've still found it a wonderful evening. I loved how you ended. What is the concept of the soil as a reference to community? Desh Bhakti. What a beautiful, ethos to end our evening on. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for taking time out of your evening and your busy lives to be with us this evening. There are a number of QR codes up on the screen. If you'd like to purchase the book, Hedgewar, according to Amazon, according to Penguin, the Definitive Biography, please see the QR code at the top middle. There's also podcasts on the book with chapter by chapter discussions that have been recorded. They can be found on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. We have also posted the QR codes for the International Center for Sustainability. We invite you to follow us. If you have found this evening enjoyable and have enjoyed the meeting of the minds and the discussion that we've had, I would love to invite you to attend one of our K lectures. We host them monthly at the center in the city. K lecture standing for Krishna, named after Jiddu Krishnamurti, where we really come together and we have very prominent speakers in all different areas. They're either politicians, policymakers, disruptors, provocative, thought leaders, on purpose to continue to stretch and pull our mind. And we've had some wonderful events. They've kicked off in January, so please come to our next one. Our next one is on the 24th of June with a former conservative parliamentarian environmental sector, from the environmental secretary, Dame Teresa Villiers. So please, you can find information of that on our website. And if you'd like to purchase the book, I promise that if you pass by the center, Sachin will give you a very good cup of tea or coffee and sign it for you. So thank you for this evening. Thank you for coming.